Greetings and welcome back to room 303, Senior English B. We turn now to the great Marcel Proust. We're going to do a little reading in the MyPerspectives volume, the Madeleine, from Remembrance of Things Past. I'm with you on page 636, 637 and following. Now, Proust, let's put it in our notes right away, one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, standing there alongside, no question, James Joyce and T.S. Eliot as representative of just what great writing can look like. Let's read a little bit about him on 636. His dates, 1871 to 1922. 1922, such an important year, right? I mean, Proust dies in 1922. T.S. Eliot will publish Wasteland in 1922. We've obviously given lectures on that at LearnStrong.net, as well, of course, as Joyce's classic Ulysses in 1922. What an amazing year for the history of literature. He was the son of a wealthy Parisian doctor and his wife. As a child, the sickly, shy Marcel had trouble fitting in. Nevertheless, Proust served in the military, became a practicing lawyer as a young man. As time passed, he became increasingly withdrawn. He devoted his time to writing. From an early age, Proust was determined not simply to be a successful writer, but he wanted to be the author of a truly great work. He had tremendous ambition. Locking himself in a soundproof room, you can do all kinds of reading on this to find out more about Proust. Proust eventually produced his classic, Remembrance of Things Past, which has been recognized as a truly great work. And of course, it's, for those of you that know anything about this work, it's prodigious. I mean, it's a tremendously large work. We're going to be looking now at one of the passages at the very beginning. Let's look at the background information on 637 really quickly. The narrator muses, that is to say, kind of considers, thinks about his current life and the difficulty in talking about the past with true accuracy. His prose seems fairly unfocused until he begins to reminisce about his days as a child in a small French town called Cambrai, a village where the narrator grew up. Now let's just enjoy the reading of the passage. Let's pay attention to the symbolism, so write that one down on page 637. The symbolism and some of the irony that's going to be a part of this. How can you go back and remember things that are now long ago past? I mean, I think it's a fair question for us to ask as we're about to leave high school and move into our university studies. What is that experience like? And it all comes down to something seemingly quite insignificant. Let's enjoy the reading.
The Madeleine, from Remembrance of Things Past, by Marcel Proust. Many years had elapsed, during which nothing of Cambrai, save what was comprised in the theater and the drama of my going to bed there, had any existence for me, when one day in winter, as I came home, my mother, seeing that I was cold, offered me some tea, a thing I did not ordinarily take. I declined at first, and then, for no particular reason, changed my mind. She sent out for one of those short, plump little cakes called Petite Madeleine, which look as though they had been molded in the fluted scallop of a pilgrim shell. And soon, mechanically, weary after a dull day with the prospect of a depressing morrow, I raised to my lips a spoonful of the tea in which I had soaked a morsel of the cake. No sooner had the warm liquid, and the crumbs with it, touched my palate than a shudder ran through my whole body, and I stopped, intent upon the extraordinary changes that were taking place. An exquisite pleasure had invaded my senses, but individual, detached, with no suggestion of its origin. And at once the vicissitudes of life had become indifferent to me, its disasters innocuous, its brevity illusory. This new sensation having had on me the effect which love has of filling me with a precious essence, or rather this essence was not in me, it was myself. I had ceased now to feel mediocre, accidental, mortal. Whence could it have come to me, this all-powerful joy? I was conscious that it was connected with the taste of tea and cake, but that it infinitely transcended those savors, could not, indeed, be of the same nature as theirs. Whence did it come? What did it signify? How could I seize upon and define it? I drink a second mouthful, in which I find nothing more than in the first, a third, which gives me rather less than the second. It is time to stop. The potion is losing its magic. It is plain that the object of my quest, the truth, lies not in the cup, but in myself. The tea has called up in me, but does not itself understand, and can only repeat indefinitely, with a gradual loss of strength, the same testimony, which I too cannot interpret, though I hope at least to be able to call upon the tea for it again, and to find it there presently, intact and at my disposal, for my final enlightenment. I put down my cup and examine my own mind. It is for it to discover the truth. But how? What an abyss of uncertainty whenever the mind feels that some part of it has strayed beyond its own borders. When it, the seeker, is at once the dark region through which it must go seeking, where all its equipment will avail it nothing. Seek? More than that. Create. It is face to face with something which does not so far exist, to which it alone can give reality and substance, which it alone can bring into the light of day. And I begin again to ask myself what it could have been, this unremembered state which brought with it no logical proof of its existence, but only the sense that it was a happy, that it was a real state in whose presence other states of consciousness melted and vanished. I decide to attempt to make it reappear. I retrace my thoughts to the moment at which I drank the first spoonful of tea. I find again the same state, illumined by no fresh light. I compel my mind to make one further effort, to follow and recapture once again the fleeting sensation. And that nothing may interrupt it in its course, I shut out every obstacle, every extraneous idea. I stop my ears and inhibit all attention to the sounds which come from the next room. And then, feeling that my mind is growing fatigued without having any success to report, I compel it for a change to enjoy that distraction which I have just denied it, to think of other things, to rest and refresh itself before the supreme attempt. And then for the second time, I clear an empty space in front of it. I place in position before my mind's eye the still recent taste of that first mouthful, and I feel something start within me, something that leaves its resting place and attempts to rise, something that has been embedded like an anchor at a great depth. I do not know yet what it is, but I can feel it mounting slowly. I can measure the resistance. I can hear the echo of great spaces traversed. Undoubtedly, what is thus palpitating in the depths of my being must be the image, the visual memory which, being linked to that taste, has tried to follow it into my conscious mind. But its struggles are too far off, too much confused. Scarcely can I perceive the colorless reflection in which are blended the uncapturable whirling medley of radiant hues, and I cannot distinguish its form, cannot invite it, as the one possible interpreter, to translate to me the evidence of its contemporary, its inseparable paramour, the taste of cake soaked in tea, cannot ask it to inform me what special circumstance is in question, of what period in my past life. Will it ultimately reach the clear surface of my consciousness, this memory, this old, dead moment, which the magnetism of an identical moment has traveled so far to importune, to disturb, to raise up out of the very depths of my being? I cannot tell. Now that I feel nothing, it is stopped, has perhaps gone down again into its darkness, from which who can say whether it will ever rise? 10 times over I must essay the task, must lean down over the abyss, and each time the natural laziness which deters us from every difficult enterprise, every work of importance, has urged me to leave the thing alone, to drink my tea and to think merely of the worries of today and of my hopes for tomorrow, which let themselves be pondered over without effort or distress of mind. And suddenly the memory returns. The taste was that of the little crumb of Madeleine, which on Sunday mornings at Cambrai, because on those mornings I did not go out before church time, when I went to say good day to her in her bedroom, my Aunt Leonie used to give me, dipping it first in her own cup of real or of lime flower tea. The sight of the little Madeleine had recalled nothing to my mind before I tasted it, perhaps because I had so often seen such things in the interval, without tasting them, on the trays in pastry cooks' windows, that their image had dissociated itself from those Cambrai days to take its place among others more recent. Perhaps because of those memories, so long abandoned and put out of mind, nothing now survived. Everything was scattered. The forms of things, including that of the little scallop shell of pastry, so richly sensual under its severe, religious folds, were either obliterated or had been so long dormant as to have lost the power of expansion which would have allowed them to resume their place in my consciousness. But when from a long distant past nothing subsists, after the people are dead, after the things are broken and scattered, still, alone, more fragile, but with more vitality, more unsubstantial, more persistent, more faithful, the smell and taste of things remained poised a long time, like souls, ready to remind us, waiting and hoping for their moment, amid the ruins of all the rest, and bare, unfaltering, in the tiny and almost impalpable drop of their essence, the vast structure of recollection. And once I had recognized the taste of the crumb of Madeleine soaked in her decoction of lime flowers which my aunt used to give me, although I did not yet know and must long postpone the discovery of why this memory made me so happy, immediately the old gray house upon the street, where her room was, rose up like the scenery of a theater to attach itself to the little pavilion opening onto the garden, which had been built out behind it for my parents, the isolated panel which until that moment had been all that I could see. And with the house, the town, from morning to night and in all weathers, the square where I was sent before luncheon, the streets along which I used to run errands, the country roads we took when it was fine. And just as the Japanese amused themselves by filling a porcelain bowl with water and steeping in it little crumbs of paper, which until then are without character or form, but, the moment they become wet, stretch themselves and bend, take on color and distinctive shape, become flowers or houses or people, permanent and recognizable. So in that moment, all the flowers in our garden and in M. Swan's Park, and the water lilies on the Vivonne, and the good folk of the village and their little dwellings, and the parish church, and the whole of Cambrai and of its surroundings, taking their proper shapes and growing solid, sprang into being, town and gardens alike, from my cup of tea.
Now, for those of us who love Proust and therefore remembrance of things past, that is to say, we really actually sit down and try and read this entire novel, we'll often report that we come back to this passage over and over again as we are reading through what is usually multi-volumed text. And we come back to this line in paragraph 6 on page 640. So let's start there. The vast structure of recollection. I have periodically asked you to consider, for example, remembering the first time that you walked into the very first classroom as a kindergartner, or the first time you walked through the doors of Worland High School as a freshman on your way to your first locker. And if you can you go there in your mind, some of you smiling now on those recollections, the vast, but we're interested in the next word, structure. See, we know that we can remember stuff, but we ask ourselves, how does that work from a cognitive, from a mental perspective? How can we go back and reconfigure the past? And what is it that calls all of that material up? What's brilliant about Proust, among all the other things that make him so brilliant, is that he took this question very seriously. He wanted to know, how is it possible that a little bit of tea and a little bit of a Madeleine, a little cookie, is going to somehow resurrect all of the feelings and emotions of an earlier time that had been somehow kind of forgotten. Now, recently I was talking about Proust with a student of mine, and he video games a lot. And I was asking him, have you ever gone back and played one of the games that you started out playing, that now is an obsolete game and nobody plays it anymore? And he said to me, you know, I haven't done that, but I think I will. And so I went back home and he uncovered some old technology that had been put away in a closet. He reconfigured it and he set up the old video game. He came in the next day and he said, whoa, I got to tell you something really weird happened. It wasn't seeing the game load, it was hearing the music play. And it took me back to a time when I was very, very young. And of course the connections with Proust were immediate here for him. And I can't even begin to tell you. He said, I almost felt like I wanted to kind of cry, but I don't know if it was because I was sad or because I was happy. And some things have happened in my life. My mom and dad separated since, I was a child playing that game. And there's a lot of memories of what my family life was like back then that no longer exists. And I think I understand now the Madeleine and the reading of this passage in ways that I couldn't have before. And I said, there it is. That's what great learning is. The ability to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. Let's go through it really quickly. Notice we begin in paragraph 1 on 637 with this notion of no reason, no particular reason. He changes his mind and decides to drink the tea and to eat a little bit of the Madeleine. And in the process, we have a shudder that runs through his body, an exquisite pleasure. Put it in your notes. This will be the epiphany. James Joyce made a lot of it. Of course, we talk about it in our lecture on Araby as well as Ulysses. And then there is that new sensation on 638, that attempt to find the essence that is not in me, but rather is me, the all-powerful joy. Why is it that certain memories, ball players will talk about this all the time. They'll, for example, leave high school, go away to their experiences. Have you noticed this in the documentaries with ball players, and they'll sometimes go back to where it all began? And if the camera is on them, you can see them as they walk, for example, onto the court, or onto the pitch, or whatever it is. And they kind of stand there, and there's this clear memory that's being called up that will involve all kinds of interesting emotions, joy being one of them. The lost magic, of course, is spoken of in the paragraph 2, along with an enlightenment that is a key here, and the attempt to try to create, somehow making distinctions between the seeker and that which is sought. All of this Proust is working with as he then comes to this notion of the structure. That is to say, let's try and figure out, he says in paragraph 3, I began again to ask myself what it could have been, this unremembered state which brought with it no logical proof of its existence, but only the sense that it was that it was a real state in whose presence other states of consciousness melted and vanished. By the way, we are reading in translation, but just notice the genius of the line that is being provided for us. He decides to attempt to make the memory reappear. He shuts out every obstacle. This is interesting given the way Proust decided to ultimately write in a soundproof room, sometimes being locked away from others for long periods of time, to try to capture those memories that were linked in some ways. Notice on 639, we have the linking of memories between taste and sight, what one can see, what one can taste. And then, of course, by the end of paragraph 4, it can't be captured. It's over. It's lost in paragraph number 5 because of the natural laziness. But then the return. And paragraph 6 is, of course, the pivotal paragraph. Suddenly the memory returns. And he's back again in an older time with his Aunt Leonie, and the memories of sight and taste come together. The long distance past. But when from a long distant past nothing subsists after the people are dead, notice the repetition of the word after the things are broken and scattered, still alone, and then notice the repetition of the word more fragile, but with more vitality, more unsubstantial, more persistent, more faithful. It's almost as if certain memories are more real for us than the actual experience itself. Ball players will often report a pivotal moment, especially a moment of adulation and joy, a victory, a culminating event, a championship. Remembering it years later seems in some ways to be more profound than the actual experience itself, because while you're having the experience, you can't step out of the experience. It's like you're having the experience, but afterwards, and it's more all of these things, more faithful. The smell and taste of things remain poised a long time, like souls ready to remind us, waiting and hoping for their moment amid the ruins of all the rest, and bear unfaltering in the tiny and almost impalpable drop of their essence the vast structure of recollection. And then, of course, to finish, all the things that he sees, all the things that he remembers, the Japanese folding paper once it's subsumed in the water, and then the passage ends. If reading something like this does anything for you, I hope that it maybe leads you to say, wow, what's the rest of the novel like? And all I can say along with Vinnie Proust's lover is, yeah, right. They don't make words really very good for explaining what this novel is like. You have to experience a novel like this. But in the process of reading Proust, you find yourself doing what we are doing now, going back in time. So let's finish by playing that game at 3B. What is for you the memory that is most palpable, most powerful, and how do you get there? It might be music for us. A lot of times it's music. For us, a lot of times it's things we see. It's film. It's a video clip. For some of us, it's what we play. I mean, my student with the video clip of the game, the video game, brings to mind. And as all gamers will say, it's a different experience playing a video game with the sound turned off, because so much of video playing is about the music, right? That's a component of the game, at least for many of the games. What is that for you? I hope that your brief reading here of Proust will lead you to want to find the rest of this amazing novel. Thank you.